would like to share these thoughts with all of you and start a bit of a round table where everybody can participate. I and my colleagues will suggest some questions, some point of thoughts, and I will ask the presenters to share their thoughts, but any of you in the audience is very much welcome if you'd like to share your opinion to do so. Actually, I would like to start by asking you how do you feel compared with the situation that you have heard, because I am now considering that we've heard the opinion of a local administration, the city, of a central administration, the Ministry of Labor, and of a specific economic sector and the industry. And they are all Italian. So maybe you have different feelings and different experiences to share from the different parts of the world where you all come from. Does anybody here feel we are more or less in the same situation, or do you have radically different experiences concerning open recognition and the valorization of competencies in the countries where you come from? Nobody. Okay, let's start from the furthest.
Just a question. We had representation from Cineca, from the president of Cineca, but I am trying to develop an open recognition network in Canada, for example, and post-secondary is seen as a very important piece of that. Not the only piece, but a very important piece, almost a connector. I'm wondering, in Italy, both in the region here, whether post-secondary is seen as that kind of connector, or whether it's a parallel tracks.
I think I'll try to answer that as a university consortium. So, I have the feeling that it's kind of another silos. I don't like to name it silos, but yes, it's another parallel sector. Don't really see the way of its role of connections between the players, because I think we have different players who need all to be connected. I don't really see in the post-secondary the role of being the connector, maybe more in the institutions. I don't know if you have some opinion. Yeah, okay.
I would like to, well, I'm from Greece. I'm representing a policy consulting entity, and I'm happy that we are part of this new European project, MIRVA, which is also behind this organization. I would like to extend a bit the question that Don raised, and perhaps give it a different dimension. I think what we have here is that in terms of bridging the two worlds, the world of education and training and the world of the labor market, of the economy and the labor market, I understand, and this is also the case in Greece, although we are far behind in terms of developments, I understand that what we use, well, I think you use the term post-secondary, but you mean the non-formal non-higher education, or after higher education, continuous professional development, if we use this term, because in Europe, post-secondary is seen in a rather restrictive way, that we are referring, not including higher education, everything that it is after school. So if we're talking about the field of continuous professional development, including IVET, including the initial vocational education training, I think I do believe, contrary perhaps to Chiara's comment, that it is the field where it's a promising field for this development, and it is the field for having the institutions and the actors, stakeholders, developing their roles, because I'm pretty sure, I don't know to which extent an industry body, which is actually active with the human capital development in the industry, understand that these developments may change your role as such. And the same happens with the state policy body. And I think ANPAL is a good example, because you are a new kid in the block and you see this development happening, etc. And of course there is a role also for the urban actors and the cities, etc. So I understand that extending the question of Don is how these institutions' roles are developing, coming together in order to facilitate the developments in this open recognition broad agenda. If it's a question, open question, and thank you.
Thank you. And we have another one.
Hello, everybody. I'm here to represent a foreigner who is also an employer in Italy since 5 years. And so I understand the macro objective or the macro goal is probably defined as job fluidity, access to jobs, and general development, society general development. And I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because there's one side, of course, that covers the formation or anything that has to do with education. I don't have a problem to find skilled young people to work with me. My problem, and that's where you said that the biggest asset is human capital, but it's also the biggest burden in this country, because of course, the amount of taxes that we pay on each individuals that we hire. So it's absolutely very enthusiastic, no, and exciting. Thank you, to hear about how we can create tomorrow's skilled young people and jobs and fluidity in that respect. But if it's not paired with actions from higher spheres or leaders, as we translated them before, ironically, we won't solve problems in this case. So my question goes to you, as you must know very well the system and much better than me. Is there a way that we can create incentives on a tax basis, on I don't know, systems and tools which are going to incentivize employers to use this system and to bring it onto the market? Because otherwise we will create a batch of beautifully skilled people and with job fluidity, but we won't have people to hire them because they cost too much.
Thank you. Maybe you would like to start answering some of the questions? Or share your thoughts?
Yes. Incentives have been available since the beginning of 2013 for at least 2 target groups for improving the skills of young people not in education or training, so famous NEET, within the program of Youth Guarantee in Italy for the target group from the age of 18 up to 29, and also a lot of financial incentives have been provided, for example, for implementing the dual system within the education and training. Any kind of incentives to school to foster the partnership with business, and so provide earlier work experience to their students, and also incentives to support employers for tutors and mentorships activities, for example. And these incentives are still available, and we, as the national agency, we manage these incentives, and we provide open call for employers to support them, as far as I know from my side. Sorry? The ANPAL. I will give you full details later on. No, there have been national campaigns diffusing this kind of, about the out guarantee has been disseminated over the last 3 years in every public employment service at the local level, but also there has been national campaigns through TV and through radio spots, I can assure you. Okay. Then, as for the tutorship activities and mentorship activities, of course, as it is tailored to the dual curricular tracks, it's not for everybody. The communication information has been delivered directly to the channel of the schools and the employers. The Chamber of Commerce also, that have established, for example, a specific section for hosting employers who can have apprentices, young apprentices, and young students in school work alternation. There is available within their national website the so-called Registro Alternanza, and inside there is all the package information provided for this kind of incentives. But if you need some more detailed information, I will give you full details later on, okay?
I think there are, okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Namorato from the European Commission, Joint Research Center, and I have a question to Alessandra, right? Alessandra, thank you for your presentation. It was very nice in terms of the content you presented, in particular all the decrees and everything that is changing in Italy right now, so I'm very interested to understand more. Hence, my question would be whether it would be possible for you to provide one or two examples. Because, for example, I don't come from an Italian context, right? So although I understand and actually share, and I think it's indisputable, all the values that you've put on there, it was very difficult for me to actually visualize how it's taking place in practice, or what will change. So if you could perhaps give an example of how it is now, how it's changing, and how it's probably going to be in the near future, that would be very helpful for someone who is outside from the Italian context, if you know what I mean. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we talk about recognition, but what do we mean actually? Do we mean validation, accreditation? But maybe that's another aspect. When you talk about informal learning, do you actually mean informal or do you mean non-formal? Because this is why perhaps I couldn't visualize what you were saying, because recognizing informal learning is extremely difficult. And also, everything that you said, has it only to do with work-based learning, or could we be thinking of recognizing other types of open learning? So, sorry, it's very open, my question, but this is why I ask for examples, if you can, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I would start from the last question because I have an insight now, right now, and I would like to keep it. I talked about informal and non-formal learning more in general because I was outlining the main features of the provided by the law, setting the principles for having access to standardized services aimed at having recognition of achievements. But of course there is a great difference between two because informal learning is, let's say, more difficult to be tracked. When I was making the example of work-based learning, I just wanted to highlight that this has been the big challenge, for example, for us as a public policies because it has always been a very lively debate in Italy if the students should be provided with some early work experience or not. But of course, these innovations are not available only in the work-based learning, but also in other kind of transitions. Not only transition from school to work, but also transitions from work to work. Within the framework of inter-professional funds that manage and fund training actions for the continuous vocational education and training, I know that they are providing also learning opportunities, and also they are revising their practices for having a more flexible way to be connected with open recognition. But I cannot be more precise because it's not really my specific domain. I have always followed better the target of young people, and so the transition from school to work than work to work. For example, also within the volunteering activities, you know, in Italy, this sector has attracted a lot of initiatives in the last two years, and I think more than 1,000 of young people have been involved in these training pathways. And with a Ministry of Labour and Social Policies, and also with the agencies, we are developing tools for assessing and recognizing this learning made within not a non-formal education or a training pathway. I don't know if you need more example about it, but for example, the volunteering activities are more exploited in the European Union that in Italy has always been conceived as a residual dimension, and now it's growing its attention. Then I would also outline, like for example, the launch of the Atlas of Qualifications, which also has a website that unfortunately, I'm sorry, I forgot to write within the presentation. Also provide principles for revising the services within the regional public authorities for making recognition more open to the VET qualification in the country, which are from a recent mapping that we have made within the ISPOL and the ANPAL, have an average of 3,000 VET qualifications. So it is quite a big universe, as you can imagine. Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? Okay.
I actually have a question for the assessor and for the councillor, since we have them here. actually, talking about cities of learning and how can a municipality help to have all these different actors we're talking to, so the training centers, the job market, and the social sector, the third sector, talked among each other. I think in the idea that if a municipality is so proactive like the Bologna municipality, how can the municipality be the, how do you say, the helper, how can it create the network through which all these different parts of society can talk to each other and start seeing if it's actually realistic, if it's possible to create really a city of learning in which open badges and open recognition is used more and more, so that we can actually next year come and not having somebody who doesn't know anything about it. So how can a municipality build the link between the training and the job market, if it's possible? Thank you. Marco.
Well, maybe first of all, by being part of the solution and not being part of a problem. I mean, for example, be here with you and hear your activities, your opinion. It's useful for us because we have to intend our works like policymaker, not as politician as such. I think that the main aim is to bridge the gap. We have to bridge the gap. We have a gap between the work system, the work labor, and the educational labor. I just make this reference. Here in Bologna, we have industries that calls for kind of work, but we have not seekers of job that kind of curricula that industry asks. Why? We have to bridge the gap. Maybe we discover that a cultural message made in 70s or 80s, go to university, became a lawyer. Nowadays, it doesn't work anymore. I am a lawyer, so I can say, but we need 200,000 of lawyers in Italy, or we need even people who says that go to technical schools is cool. It's cool, because then they find work. And we have to provide this cultural message, also to family, also to people, also to citizens, if we want to bridge that gap, first of all. The second, I mean, it's like, try to be the example, seems like we have also in the public institution to try to elaborate that kind of environment. It's a sort, before we were talking a few days on the launch of a social intranet of the Municipality of Bologna. This means that if we want, we are a public authorities, we don't have a lot of money, of course, because we have a lot of cuts, and then we are not used to go to the private market, for example, to take some people who can make photographs. But if inside our dependent we find someone who have an open badge on photography, for example, because this is a soft skill, we can use our internal resource instead of going to external expenditures. This is not only a term of cost, cut of cost, but it's also a way in which we can use internal resources, evaluate and valorize soft skills. And this, I mean, it's useful to foster a way of an environmental system in which public and private use the same language. This is the second, I think, example that I can provide you to mind the gap, even though we know that in the public sector there was a lot of barriers, technical, administrative, and legal barriers. So this kind of exchange is not easy like in the private sector. And the third one, and the last one, I think that we have to bear in mind also the legal standpoint at the EU level. In the previous speech I saw that we need to eliminate national barriers. But we have also to bear in mind that education and vocational training policies are within member state competence, And so it's excluded at the EU level, the harmonization of law. This means that we have to use the same language, and then from a bottom-up approach we can arrive to an harmonization. But we cannot make this harmonization by law. We have to do this by politics, by cultural standards, by educational. And in this way, policymakers can foster, through public authorities, through local authorities, through the urban agenda, to create a common ground.
Thank you very much. Can I ask another question, or any? Yeah.
Yes, my question is for Dr. Mantoan. Okay, Marco. Call me Serge. The way industry works with competencies today is we define competency standards, but there is a way to define competency standards where you have a group of experts and then it takes a certain amount of time, and then the standards won't be revised for 4 or 5 years. And things are changing all the time. Maybe, I don't know, in the industry, the auto industry, but in IT, for example, it's changing all the time. And so, could you imagine that instead of aligning badges to existing competency standards, we could use badges as a means to elicit new competencies that are emerging, that are not yet defined into existing competency standards, and that could be used to elicit innovative practice, new competencies that didn't exist and were not referred in previous competency frameworks. So we could have, like OpenStreetMap, you know OpenStreetMap, where you can create a map as a community, instead of having Google that gives you the map, which is all done. So we can co-create the map, that we could use a collective intelligence of the people working in the auto industry to create these maps by abstracting their work into badges that would be systems of recognition. Because if you think about the people who created cathedrals, they didn't have competency frameworks, but they could recognize each other. They are systems of recognition. And so maybe the competency standards we know today were just a time. It was useful at a certain period of time, but now we could have the means to go back to a time where recognition precedes the production of standards.
So, since we are at the beginning of the process, I'm open to all the idea. My speech was already concentrated to the training of the R skill, but we are thinking to, for example, one problem we have in updating the resourcing to know if they really not understand or not only training, but are in action. They can in action to use the competence they have, for example. This is a metric that we have to find. There are some differences, for example, from the university or our setup, because we issue small training, 3 days, 4 days. So, for example, evaluate soft skill is not easy for us, but we can use the community to evaluate that skill. And we can use, for example, the human resource feedback evaluate the soft skill of that competence. That's or some idea we have.
Other questions or opinions? So maybe I would get back to Don's input at the beginning of this this conversation to ask to Marco Mantoan again, how would you feel as an industry? Yes, as an industry representative, to have this role of a sort of a catalyst to receive the inputs from different learning and training frameworks, the formal, the non-formal, the informal, variously recognized. Would you see industry as a recipient of this recognition, or more of an active actor who is actually doing the recognition? And how do you see the cooperation between industry? Because I think this is a crucial point. Different industries who need the same competencies are actually competitors. So would they recognize each other's skills, or would they compete in designing their own skill and keeping them for themselves?
It's very, very, very complex and long question. There are some basic competency and skill already defined inside the industry. I can only, would like to be clear, I can only speak about automotive industry. That is a very big, I think it's big enough to have a good example, a good data, but not the whole industry. So what happens inside our industry is most competencies are already mapped by the human resource, are already made between, in the relation between associations like ANFIA and other local associations, small and medium enterprise association, training provider, and so on. So about mapping, I think not in all the rules, probably not complete so for all point of view, but most of the rules are already defined. Now, because you know we are facing the problem of the Industry 4.018, that something will change in the organizational, for example, method and so on, and also in the competency on the skills. So for the future, we need to remap or create a new map, because probably we will see new jobs that we now don't know. Okay, this is the first answer. And about the recognition, the endorsement, and so I think it's a loop. I think it's not only that the industry is waiting for, sit down and wait that someone else is doing something for you. But you must be active in doing and ask and define clearly what is the requirement, what is your need. And so it's completely a loop. This is one of the reasons I'm here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm from Belgium, creating sort of academic institute. I don't really have a question, but rather an opinion. We are here together with political, entrepreneurial and academic stakeholders, but I think we forget the people from time to time. We want to deliver the badges, but it's the people waiting for the badges. So we have to provoke them as well to get the badges, to go to the companies, to go to the political stakeholders and say, hey, I have these badges. So we will have to need and to put on a data bank, as was already mentioned, and the companies who have internal already, the system of the badges internally in the companies already exists, also in the public sector, but it's only the step to make it open to everybody that will be very difficult. And taking into account that we can make 40, 50 or 60 badging symbols, I think it will be something international and something private, and that will have to come from the people as well. Maybe the new LinkedIn, maybe the new Facebook, but I think that is what has to happen, and it has to come from the people, and then it will work.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much to all of you for all these interesting thoughts shared. And I'm speaking very slowly to give the time to anybody who's thinking of something to come up with it. And if this does not happen, yes, it does.
Because a lot of us refer to the macro picture, I think, as always, money is driving the whole developments. I think that there are two driving policy concerns which have to do with funding and the returns. There is one thing is this famous problem, I mean infamous actually, but it's a big problem that we have with the employment. As such a policy concern, states, countries are spending a lot of public money to address this issue. And we are still, the hindering factors are hidden behind these, what economists of labor say, the market frictions, that job matching is still very difficult. So this is a very promising field for all these open recognition and agenda to improve. And because a lot of public funds will be saved if these are developing and labor market mobility is there operational. A second area is this human capital agenda from the industry. Again, both public but also private sector spends a lot of money in bringing up human capital employable. And I think if we have critical development there in terms of stakeholders or the people engaged, as our colleague said from Belgium, etc., this is a big area where we could have also some returns, both as regards the private sector, but also as it regards the societies and the public sector as such. Thank you.
Thank you. And this makes me think that going back to the open bar challenges we were discussing earlier, we are all talking now all the time about the social capital one, mainly, which was curiously one of the challenges who had the least interested people when we raised our hands before. So I think this is already a big progress, something that we have learned. At first, maybe each of us, for his or her own interests, didn't have this as prior focus, but when interacting with institutions and with specific sectors, it becomes clear that the social capital representation is probably one of the biggest things that open recognition and open badges can achieve for the society, I think. I don't know.
May I just add one sentence on social capital that you said, just referring, for example, one experience, little, but we have made here as a municipality in Bologna, that I think at some point in contact with the discussion of today. We have a problem to use common goods, as all the cities, as a lot of cities in all over the world, and not only in Europe. But we have experimented to exploit one article of our Constitution that talks about horizontal subsidiarity. And we have done pact of cooperation with citizens for the regeneration of common goods. We have done thousands of pacts. We have reactivated almost 30,000 of citizens. That's a big amount. That is a treasure of social capital. That's the reason why we would like not only to map volunteers, people who want to take care of a garden, but we want to create a social balance of the city as such. Because I think that in this way we just not map our treasure, but we activate volunteers and people who improve their soft skill through association and through the dialogue of public institution and private. Because in a period of lack of vocation for policy, why people do not, for example, inscribe in political party, but they want to be active in social group, in association? I think that one of the interesting things for who thinks about policymaker is to reactivate this kind of social capital as a treasure of a local authority as such, a municipal as such, a region or a national member states. And in this field, I think there are some common points with what are you doing with open badge.
Yeah, this is a wonderful conclusion. Thank you very much. So we have soft skills as social capital who are valuable not only for employment, which is something that we always try to enact, but actually as real social capital of the community and of the network, of a community network. Thank you very much to all of you. No? One.
It's the example I'm thinking is we've heard a lot about the different sectors. We haven't heard so much about the public sector as a workforce. And my question would be, is there an opportunity for government to be an early adopter of this with a view to developing its own workforce? And the example I have is in Canada, in the federal government, there is a thing they call Talent Cloud, and it's a short-term secondment. So for people who need a task, to be able to find somebody who can help them with that task. And they see this as a sort of a skills dissemination and even a knowledge dissemination thing that can even go beyond the public sector. And I'm just wondering if there's interest in pursuing a model like that, because it may help supercharge things among policymakers once they experience it themselves.
Yes, I think the public sector plays an important role, and the recognition, the open recognition, could be really a strategic driver for the public sector, because within, at least in Italy, within the public sector, human capital quite often risk to be excluded from decision-making process, and we need there is a lack of intermediate steps, recognizing also training and learning achievements which have been achieved outside formal qualifications. In Italy, to access the public services, you need to have an open selection procedure, which somehow is still very long and very complex. And during the lifetime of your career in the public sector, somehow you may have some misunderstanding. I was thinking of the recent OECD report about skills strategy, which has been issued for our country, for Italy, for example, at the beginning of October, in which they have clearly identified among the top 10 challenges for this country the need for fostering the activation of the skills pillar, not only the creation of the skills, so acting within the actors who provide the skills in the right age, so in the school, in the centers, in training centers, universities, but also in the pillar of activation. We need to be aware that there is still a lot to do for transparency, for making from non-formal learning and informal learning more visible and more usable, let's say.
Thank you. Other opinions? Okay, so I think we are ready for our lunch. Thank you very much. We go on in the afternoon.